Okay, I'm on the middle of page 103. Violet tried to slip past the two men, heading the way Mr. Martin had gone to look for drinks. One of the men stepped in front of her, blocking her way. "I'm just going to use the saloon," Violet said, with the most innocent look she could muster. The bathrooms on trains were called saloons, for no reason Violet could imagine. The man stepped aside and let Violet pass. Violet tried to walk calmly to the end of the car, gripping the backs of the seats as the train's movement threw her from one side of the aisle to the other. She opened the door with difficulty and walked nervously through the narrow vestibule. The 4 doors at its front, back, and sides rattled loudly. She opened the door to the next car and managed to squeeze through it before it slammed on her. A conductor stepped in front of her. Not the conductor from Washington, but a different one. "Whoa there, missy," he said. "You don't need to be running around between train cars like that. It's dangerous. Where's your seat?" "There," said Violet, nodding to the car ahead. One thing her 11 years of life had taught her was that most males considered women and girls to be simultaneously mysterious and not very bright. So it wasn't very hard to lie to them. The conductor looked over his shoulder. "Well then, how did you manage?" "Excuse me," said Violet, and pushed past him. She found Mr. Martin in a vestibule after she'd passed through 4 more cars. He came out one door as she was coming out the other. He had a brown bottle of root beer in each hand and one sticking out of each of his trousers pockets. "Mr. Martin, stop," she said, holding up a hand toward him. She was out of breath from the effort of walking in the rocking train and pushing through the heavy doors. Mr. Martin stopped and stood looking down at her quizzically. The train was chugging slowly up a steep grade. The jointed floor of the vestibule heaved and creaked under their feet, and they both braced their legs to keep from falling. "There are some men back there," Violet said, "looking for you. They're wearing tight collars and they won't say their names." Mr. Martin looked surprised at none of this. "Palmer agents. Did they ask for me by name?" Violet had to think for a moment. "No." Mr. Martin nodded. "Good. Don't tell them my name, please." He put the 2 bottles of root beer into Violet's hands. "Forgive my abruptness, Miss Mayhew, but I'm going to get off the train here." "To what?" said Violet, not sure she'd heard him right. The train had reached the crest of the hill. "You can tell them where I got off," said Mr. Martin. "In fact, you had better. Give my apologies to the ladies." He opened one of the side doors of the vestibule and stepped out. "Mr. Martin!" Violet gasped. The side doors were for getting off the train, but getting off after it had stopped, of course. Violet didn't hear him hit the ground because the train was making so much noise. It was true it wasn't moving very fast, but she couldn't see what he'd stepped off into, and neither, she thought, could he. There might have been a 300-foot cliff beside the tracks for all either of them knew. She dropped the root beer bottles, one of them shattered, and grabbed the handrail beside the still swinging door. She leaned out as far as she dared. She felt a warm wind on her face and smelled pine trees and coal smoke. "Mr. Martin!" she called. The train crested the mountain and started downward again, picking up speed. Violet heard a door behind her open. A heavy hand landed on her shoulder and hauled her back into the vestibule. The 2 men, Palmer agents, whatever those were, glared down at Violet. The one who had grabbed her barked. "What do you think you're doing, miss?" "Where's our pad fee?" snapped the second one. Violet angrily jerked her shoulder free of the man's hand. "Who?" "Our pad fee. Where'd he go? Did he jump?" "I don't know what you're talking about," said Violet. "Listen, miss, we're looking for Sandor Arpadfi. Scar on his face, 1 eye, missing 3 fingers on his right hand. Sound like anybody you know?" "3 fingers?" said Violet, playing dumb. She watched the remaining root beer bottle rolling around on the floor. "We're not going to get anywhere with this one," said the second agent. "She warned him," said the first agent, pointing to Violet. He gripped Violet's arm, hard. It hurt. "Where's our pad fee, girl? Don't play games with us. This is a criminal investigation of the highest order." "Treason," the other one said succinctly. Violet felt a twist in her stomach. Treason, she'd always heard, was worse than murder. Treason means when you go against your government. But why should she believe these two idiots? She could make her own decisions about people. Mr. Martin didn't seem like a traitor to her. She glared at the agents and said nothing. He must have jumped. The agent who had held Violet's arms nodded at the side door, which was still swinging, opening a few inches and then gently slamming itself shut again. I'm going after him. The agent let go of Violet and kicked the door wide open. Violet could see the light shining out the train's many windows, flickering over the ground moving by below. The agent turned to the other agent. Question the Suffs. See if you can get any of them to understand what accessory after the fact means. Then get off in Roanoke and cable J. Edgar Hoover that we've spotted our Padfie. He stepped out through the door. No, Violet cried, horrified, as he jumped. The train was by no means moving as slowly as it had been when Mr. Martin jumped off. Come on, miss, said the other agent, grabbing her arm. Let's see what you and the Suffs can manage to babble out. You know, I don't believe he ever told us his name, Miss Dexter said loudly. Violet was surprised at how well she pretended to be stupid, and surprised she was willing to do it for Mr. Martin, whom Dexter clearly disliked. He joined us at Union Station and begged a spare seat in our car, but he is a complete stranger to me. The agent, who had finally admitted that his name was Mr. Christopher, had sat down in Mr. Martin's empty seat and unfolded a paper on his lap, a rough pencil sketch that could have been Mr. Martin in the same vague way that pictures of Uncle Sam could have been Violet's grandfather Mayhew. It did have a scar on it. Many of the other suffragists had gotten up and crowded around, clinging to the backs of the seats for balance. Miss Dexter, Mr. Christopher said, try to get this through that female wool you call a brain. The suffragist hissed. This man is dangerous. He poses a threat to the United States of America. By helping to conceal him, you could be guilty of treason. What's he supposed to have done? Demanded a gray-haired suffragist in a purple dress. I can't tell you that, said Mr. Christopher. The woman in purple snorted. Mr. Christopher asked a number of questions about whether anyone had heard Sandor Padfie mention where he had been, or where he was going, or any names of friends or relatives or associates. Nobody offered him much help. Did he say anything that sounded Bolshevist? Mr. Christopher finally demanded. You know, anything un-American. Miss Dexter shrugged delicately. I suppose some of the things he said were a bit socialist, she said, but there's an enormous difference between a Bolshevist and a socialist. That's what the socialists would like you to think, said Mr. Christopher. So this is getting kind of into politics of that time. Socialists are good Americans, said the woman in purple angrily. They believe in corporate cooperation instead of competition. Many of the greatest and wisest people in our country are socialists. Mr. Christopher sneered. That's why women shouldn't be allowed to vote, he said. The female mind isn't capable of making fine distinctions of logic. The woman turned as purple as her dress. Miss Helen Keller is a socialist, she stormed. Miss Lillian Wald is a socialist. Miss Jane Addams is a socialist. If they kept their addled brains out of politics, maybe someone would marry them, Mr. Christopher said nastily. Ugh. He got to his feet. The train was slowing as if approaching a station, but Violet thought that wasn't the only reason he was leaving. The crowd was closing in on him. Mr. Christopher took his pencil sketch and his notebook and retreated. What a horrid man, Miss Dexter said. The other suffragists agreed heartily. They made their way back to their seats, and Violet could hear them talking, speculating, she supposed, about Mr. Martin and what he'd done to get those dreadful government agents chasing him. Violet's stomach squirmed. She hoped the ground hadn't been too far away when Mr. Martin had hit it. Where had he landed, and what would he do now? I'm going to stop there. I'm at the top of 110.